18-year-old Jack Woodley, just old enough to be thinking about moving out, young enough tonight to be having the time of his life at the fair, young enough to still be phoning his mum to plead for more money for just one more ride. It's the last time she'll ever hear his voice. That same evening, Jack is dying in hospital. Set upon on his way home by a gang of 10, he'd been viciously beaten and stabbed twice. One would prove fatal.
This is my life now. Like, I'm here 24/7. That's the only way that I can cope with this constant pain.
2 years on, it's not just the brutality of Jack's killing that compounds Zoe's paralysing grief, but the fact that those who killed him were just children themselves. 10 boys, the oldest 17, the youngest just 14. Zoe watched them in court every day of the trial.
Doctors give evidence, professionals, and they struggled, I think, to take in. I think there was 100 and something injuries in a couple of minutes or seconds. They struggled to even give an evidence to take in that it was 10 children that had done this, that had done these injuries.
What did you make of the fact that the people who killed your son were children?
I couldn't believe it. This height at the time, I mean, a lot of them are reaching 18 now, but and they were just kids. And I remember thinking, what is wrong with the world that kids think that they feel a need to do this?
But while she has no sympathy, she is desperate for some sort of understanding. Without it, she says, nothing changes. She asked to be filmed at Jack's grave to show the reality of the violence impacting on and inflicted by really young people.
Before Jack died, if I heard anything like this, you'd be sympathetic, but it's completely different living it. You know, my entire life is just, you know, it's gone.
The children who killed Jack are among a growing cohort. Data analysed by Channel 4 News reveals the number of young people being sentenced for murder has soared over the last decade. The figure rose from 56 in 2012 to 96 last year, with a record high of 101 recorded in 2021. And the number of children aged between 12 and 17 with murder convictions has quadrupled over the past 5 years.
How are you going to understand the bigger picture if you're not listening to the other half?
Sully says her son is the other half of the story of violence and young people, one that must be heard if there's any chance of stopping the killing. She's asked to remain anonymous because of threats to the family. Her son's serving more than 20 years in jail for killing a teenager. She says she watched horrified as he was first a victim of violence, stabbed in an attack, before he went on later to become a perpetrator. Tell me what that moment was like when you heard that had happened.
All I can remember was that everything turned red in my life. I was seeing the walls in my room to be something like covered in blood. And I felt like I was covered in fear.
Just to put to you what people will say, of course, that your son has to take responsibility for what he did, whether he was a victim to begin with or not. What do you say to those people?
Myself and my husband made a decision to hand over our son to the police because we knew nothing about the details, but we said whatever was happening on that day, if he took any part, he will need to pay back for that.
That must have been very difficult.
Extremely, but it was the right thing to do because somebody lost his life. And I truly feel for the mother. Still, with every other stabbing case happens, it opens up the wound for me.
Sully now works within the criminal justice system to try to improve understanding of just how children and young people become involved in violence. Do you think this whole issue of violence by and towards young people is enough of a priority for government?
Not at all. I think, God forbid, I don't wish it on no one, Once it starts to affect the children on MPs and ministers, then it will become a priority.
The absolute waste of life on both sides is a given. The more difficult question is, can the rising numbers of children and young people killing or being killed be stemmed? Can any of these tragedies be prevented? Of course, there are different factors in different cases, but there is evidence in some that the violent deaths of children were not only feared, but predicted too. Child safeguarding reviews looking into child deaths and occasionally into the lives of children who kill or hurt others reveal that the risk to certain children is often known. Their real names not published to protect the identity of children who couldn't be protected from the violence in their lives. Archie was a child long known to safeguarding authorities. In February 2018, at a child protection conference, attendees state Archie was at risk of killing or being killed. 3 months later, 15-year-old Archie is dead, killed by another 15-year-old. And in June this year, a safeguarding review into the lives of Child N and Child O record the grim similarities in their childhoods: neglect, exposure to domestic abuse, parental substance misuse. In March 2020, it records that agencies had serious concerns about several things: Child O offending and the risks the behaviour posed to himself and others. 8 months later, Child O, then 17, had killed Child N, who was a year younger.
When someone's had a foreign object, so a weapon, into their body...
At a youth club in the North East, tonight's activity is not a game.
Does anyone know how quickly I should be doing that?
Street Doctors, a charity set up by medical students, teaches children what to do if someone is stabbed. They reject the idea. It suggests that violence is inevitable, but rather an acceptance of the reality for some young people.
Rightly, is the outrages about the victims, the child victims, the young people who are victims. But the perpetrators, if you talk to them, if you find out about their lives, they are perpetrators for reasons. And until we understand this, we're not going to get any further. And I think the outrage does need to be on both sides, but we have to understand it's not because we want to be nice to perpetrators. It's because we want these numbers to drastically reduce.
Zoe is desperate for the numbers to be reduced too, to reduce the waste of lives of children and young people not allowed to grow old. What do you miss about Jack?
Oh, everything. I used to always tell him off because he used to always joke and not take life seriously. I sometimes feel guilty because obviously I used to tell him off all the time and tell him to grow up, without really realising that he wouldn't get that chance.
Well, joining me from Brixton in South London is Pastor Lorraine Jones, a youth campaigner who lost her son Dwayne after he was attacked while protecting another person. And from the Conservative Party conference in Manchester, Anne Longfield, a former Children's Commissioner. Just a short while ago, we were told that a murder investigation is underway after a 22-year-old man was found this afternoon with knife wounds in Brixton, close to where you are. Pastor Lorraine, it is almost unbelievable that as we're arranging to talk to you, another stabbing has happened in your area.
This is the reality of the urgency which we're living in, Jackie. Like you said, I'm here to speak about the great need that we have. And we've lost another son. Another son has been killed. The tent is behind me. Another one of our young people is lying on the streets of Lambeth, dead. It's a state of emergency. And you know, I heard the lady that was speaking before, and she was speaking about the perpetrators. These ones are the ones that are most vulnerable and sick. If we can support them, if we can work with them, then it will deter all of these murders and killings. We have to. It's a state of emergency.
And yet that is often one of the hardest to accept arguments in all of this, isn't it? You know, we're looking at our numbers today, showing the numbers of children, 12 to 17 convicted of murder, has quadrupled over the past decade. We need to find out how we got here, don't we?
Most definitely, Jackie. It's not rocket science. The Glasgow public health approach is something that has worked. We need it here. The public health approach. It's the most vulnerable ones that are doing this. I work with a number of schools, and the schools are going through drastic changes where they're struggling with finance. My organisation, Dynamics, was working with a group of they were 11 and 12-year-olds for the past 4 years, only to be told now they can't come anymore because they've got no funding. Now, if we're cutting services, activities from these young people, children, we're talking, I mean, the youngest I know that has carried a knife is 7. If we're cutting services to them, how will they nurture? They're vulnerable. And the vulnerable ones are the ones that are carrying out these barbaric acts. We're talking about murder in cold blood. This is how it has got to now.
I mean, Anne Longfield, we have seen 3 teenagers stabbed to death in 6 days. A 14-year-old in Manchester a couple of weeks ago, not far from where you're at Conservative Party conference today. Lorraine Jones says this is a state of emergency. Is it what's being talked about at conference and the ministers talking about it, the delegates?
Yeah, absolutely. It is an emergency. It's a crisis, and it's happening in plain view. And just as you're reporting on it, more come in. At the moment, they're dropping into my inbox every day. Violence, ending young lives and devastating families. It's not been a debate in this conference. It should be on all our concerns, and it should be that level of emergency. We said from the Commission on Young Lives, which I set out to map out a plan of what we can do about this, because it is solvable, but it has to be tackled. And the first was that's to recognise the level of emergency, have COBRA meetings, demand that level of attention from across government, and get the resources behind it, because young lives are being ended as we speak, and that's something that should devastate us all.
Pastor Jones, I mean, you're shaking your head, you're almost in tears.
I am, because we need action, Jackie. I lost my son in 2014. I haven't been brought around the table. There's so many of us that are in the grassroots, working hard. We haven't been brought around the table. Who's listening to us? We're seeing billboards and different things being erected in our communities, fancy flats. We're seeing all of that, but yet where's the resources for the young people? Where are the resources for the community groups like myself to help the most vulnerable?
And
the Prime Minister needs to get here. We need the Education Minister. We need them to come into our estates, listen to us, hear, feel what we're going through. We've got a young life that is lying dead. How much more can we take? We don't want any more. We need help. And action speaks louder than words. Bring us into Parliament then. Bring us. Bring us. It's our children. We're losing our children.
Anne Longfield.
For this, and it's not an incurable disease. It can be solved.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Lorraine, to cut across you. Anne Longfield, you are at conference with the Prime Minister. You hear Lorraine Jones, someone who lost her son years ago, who has worked tirelessly for years to try to help young people. What should the message be to Rishi Sunak? Is he listening? Does he hear? Why isn't this seen by him and the government as the state of emergency as described by Lorraine Jones there?
Well, I don't have the answer to that, because I find it absolutely impossible to understand how anyone can not see the emergency of this. And you've got a Prime Minister that is now putting forward a slogan which is about big decisions for the future. These young people don't have a future, and these families that are fearing for their children night after night. I agree. The Prime Minister should come out of here and should go visit some of the communities, talk to the families that have been devastated, and talk to the young people about how they feel about the level of violence and the threats that they feel under. We need to look at the support that's there for young people, to support them to succeed, and ensure children, they're kept in school, they actually get the support they need, and they get the youth workers and mentors that they can look up to, inspire, and places to go. They don't actually ask for much, but they aren't on any agenda at the moment in terms of youth violence, and that has to change.
Lorraine, just very briefly, if you would, do you think enough value is given to the lives of the young children most affected and impacted by violence?
Not at all. And the most dangerous thing is, Jackie, these children are our future. They are our future leaders. And if we're not going to invest in them, if we're not going to love them and nurture them, what kind of future do we have? And that's not rocket science. Are they human in Parliament? It's a state of emergency. How are things going to be another 10, 20 years from now?
Pastor Lorraine, Anne Longfield, thanks to both of you for joining us.